Menarik ya, sesi soal jawab bersama dengan YB RAFIZI RAMLI bersama dengan student-student di dalam program Malaysian Student Leaders Summit. Dan kita boleh nampak ya pelajar-pelajar ini begitu terbuka mengajukan soalan ya kepada Datuk Seri RAFIZI RAMLI dan diberikan dengan jawapan yang begitu tuntas, padu dan pencerahan yang begitu baik sekali. Jadi sahabat semua, tanpa membuang masa, ayo kita bersama-sama sekali lagi untuk menonton sesi soal jawab ini.
Political party like PKR that started off as a movement because it was an ML.
I'm an A-level student.
For the wonderful speech. Perhaps let me open to the floor. Let's start from the right side. Can you please introduce yourself and with your questions?
Hi, I'm Kayong and I'm an A-level student currently studying in Sunway. So thank you Datuk Seri for the insights. So Datuk Seri, over the years we've seen several prominent figures who were once central to the Reformasi movement and instrumental in building keadilan leave the party, such as leaders like Allahyarham Tan Sri Datuk Seri Abdul Khalid bin Ibrahim, Asmin Ali, Chua Tian Chiang and others. These individuals played key roles during the party's most critical phases, especially during its early struggles. Today, keadilan faces renewed scrutiny. There's growing public perception of internal challenges, alleged nepotism, and a drift from the reformist ideals that once galvanized the party. Despite the Madani government's emphasis on reform and institutional renewal, many Malaysians continue to express concerns about political interference, selective justice, weak institution, and instability within the ruling coalition. My question is, in light of these realities, how do you see the future of keadilan and the Madani government going into the next general election? And more importantly, do you believe that the reformasi spirit still live on within keadilan, or has it, as some critics suggest, turned into reformati? Thank you.
Maybe we take a few,
Can we have questions? Yeah.
Sure, go ahead. Yep. Thank you, Datuk Sri, for the speeches now. I have a question. So you were mentioning that we need to come up with an idea. What is the framework for our reform actually means? Meaning that we have to define that properly before we proceed to the ideas of implementation. So my question is very simple. Why do not you think of that before you got in power? That's it.
Can I have another question?
Another one?
Anybody else?
Assalamualaikum. Right. Hi YB. So basically you've mentioned before that reforms is based on loops and iterations, and we can agree that reforms is also something that must bring something new, and usually novelty will disrupt the status quo, the very thing that made a complacent system and the people within it very fear of the changes. And you also mentioned before that anything that between or like will disrupt the fine line is need to be investigated and all. So what are your thoughts and what do you have to say about, like the change in the status quo and also the fine line within the system? Thank you.
Okay, the first question, reformasi or reformati, and I think it's bound to happen in a political party like PKR that started off as a movement because it was an amalgamation of different groups of people coming together. You have the ex-UMNO, you have the NGOs, you have student leaders, you have the professionals coming together. But I think over the years, the challenge for PKR has always been and will be is how it manages the temptation of power. Because the very basis of PKR is to separate the largest of power from politics. The whole concept is that if you come forward to become a politician, it is a national service. Okay, you get your salary, but beyond that, if you want to make money, go and do something else. Likewise, even if you are very influential in the party, but if you don't fit the need and the structure of the government, a PKR government cannot be seen to be rewarding anyone from the party just because the moment you do that, then this whole nexus of politics, business, reward, largesse, the very basis that PKR opposed against UMNO in the past, and then people cannot tell the difference. That's why you see PKR began to have this huge problem since 2008 when PKR first got power in Selangor. It wasn't too much of a problem prior to 2008 because people did not want positions in PKR. From 2008, you have the state governments of Selangor and Penang, and then from 2018 and 2022. So I think this constant battle between the purists, people who believe that don't go that path, and people who say that for the party to grow, we must be like this. And that's why, therefore, contestation for party leadership becomes very intense. Because there's this feeling that if you are part of the senior leadership of the party, it comes with government's positions, and the government positions allows for governments and public largesse. And that's why you see all this, contestation from time to time. So I think if PKR does not handle this well in the, this year, in the next 2 years, or in the future, if I were in your shoes, it's very difficult to tell the difference. Whatever you say about UMNO or PAS or Bersatu for that matter, their selling proposition, unique selling proposition, USP, is actually very unique. They want to defend the Malays. And it does appeal to a large section of the voters. If you look at DAP, whatever DAP says, the USP for DAP is to champion and defend the rights of the non-Malays. It does appeal. So how does a party like PKR position its USP if it's seen to be just like any other party? And then you can't fault the public for thinking like, why bother with PKR? And I think that's my worry about PKR, for donkey years. And we've said enough and very clearly about the danger. And I'm not sentimental about anything, I was brought up not to be sentimental. That's why I only attended UKAC, MSLS 3 or 4 times in my lifetime. Although I spent all my years in the UK building UKAC in the early years. Because people have to move on, and I learned enough that I can't be sentimental. So in that sense, I'm not really sentimental about PKR as a party. But PKR does represent one very important element for our society in the future. It is a middle ground party. It is the most successful multiracial party. It is a party that has built itself as a policy-based party in the future. If PKR goes down, it will drag the public belief and faith in a party that does not want to go into the traditional value propositions, not race, not religion. It is the only party that has been successful not playing race for the last 30 years. Going down, if PKR goes down, that means, the promise that Malaysia will one day move away from race politics is going to get dimmed. Unfortunately, it is out of our hands now. And I think, we can always voice out, but ultimately that's what the leadership of PKR and by extension PH has to reflect now. It's not so much about the largesse and the competition for who gets what within government. It is the future of political offering to the public. And I hope, they take our views sincerely. And otherwise, I don't know what advice I can give to people, because, as I said earlier, respect must be earned. We should not vote or follow anything purely by the label. We must follow by the substance. And if PKR has lost that substance, unfortunately, even people like me who spent 25, 26 years in PKR, I'll find it very difficult to justify for other people. The second question about, the clarity of what is reform agenda. That's why I said, with the benefit of hindsight, the formation of a government in 2022 was kind of unique because it was a hung parliament. I drafted the series of early principles for BN and other parties to consider. More or less, these are the framework parameters. But of course, when you negotiate for something as extraordinary like that, you'll be left with a lot of general statements. General statements from the Constitution, general statements about the well-being of the people and so on. So obviously, as a general principle, I think we had it. And then from that first document, we then translated into an agreement between all the parties that form unity government. Again, it was just a series of general statements. What we never got to do was to be very specific about the kind of reform. And this is when, if you look at the model, especially in European countries, take Germany, for example. After every election, sometimes they take up to 2 months to negotiate a formation of a coalition government, because they really specify every single thing. What is the red lines, what must be there, even to the detail of the kind of deficit, the kind of budget, everything was stretched out. And therefore it was very clear. So I think it was water under the bridge for this government. But I'm hoping that Malaysians and the voters will warm up to the idea that in the future, most probably we should allow post-election coalitions and demand the negotiations to be a lot more detailed. And therefore, parties, whether Bersatu ke, UMNO ke, Parti Syahril ke, one day, when they decide to go into election, and then they end up with 20 seats, and they become kingmakers, so to speak. The public must know that if you form a government and you break some of these covenants, we will punish you severely. These are the covenants that you should not break, because we voted for you because of this. If in the next general election and series after that, if Malaysians can warm up to that idea and not rush into forming a government 1 week, 2 weeks, then I think, at least we have a clarity and we can avoid this bitter taste, bitter aftertaste, as if that people have been taken for a ride. You promise one thing, but you deliver another thing. The third question tadi, Zaim tadi tanya, I was trying to wrap my head around it. The question is about, Zaim yang tanya pun dah keluar dah. The question is about, you're not going to burn anything today, are you?
Oh, no. Tak ada bakar-bakar ni. So basically the question is, you've said before that wanted to do reform need a fine line, but also like reform we need to agree akan bring novelty which will disrupt status quo. So what are your thoughts, like what you have to say about trying to disrupt the status quo, but at the same time bringing the reform agenda. The very hard, the fine line, you will say. Thank you.
See, that's why I think, it begins with the head. I'm sorry, this sounds it's very sensitive again. But I think any prime minister, when he or she takes over the reign of a government, I think they must be very authentic about the kind of change that they want to do. And that's what I meant all along, about there must be a clarity about the reform agenda, because the civil service, for example, takes cue from the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister is very clear that these are the status quo that I want to challenge, and then the civil service eventually will have to toe the line. Likewise, the stakeholders outside, if they are very clear about the status quo that the Prime Minister and the government wants to challenge, say for example, the Alibaba culture in our society, then all the stakeholders know that there's going to be a big war on this one. So I better readjust how my view is, Unfortunately, so far, I think we lack that authenticity and distinction between which of the status quo that we really want to challenge, Kalau di sebelah kerajaan Madani is all about the rich versus the poor. It's very big, the rich versus the poor, because which exactly is the rich? And then that's why sekarang ni dia jadi problem, because if you say that this is the rich versus the poor, is a class war, and then the super rich ni, maha kaya ni 2-3 orang, and then your best friends or your officers semua end up having dinner with them, and that's it. It's a problem. So and then we have this problem about high value tax, high value goods tax. The narrative was, this is a class war, the rich versus the poor, and then you reverse. Payah. So you have to be very clear in your administrative span, because you only have 5 years, which status quo you want to dismantle, and focus on that one. And unfortunately, I think, I'm disgruntled, so to speak, because I think the easiest low-hanging fruit that this government could have achieved is in the fight against corruption. You don't need to define that. That's very clear, very easy. Everyone can relate that, But that must begin with putting the right person dekat SPRM. And everything around it must be reformed very quickly. Only then you will be able to build the confidence. And I think it's water under the bridge. We missed that opportunity for Dato' Sri Anwar to redefine the authentic, clear status quo that he wants to challenge. I think it's going to be quite difficult in the remainder of the 2 years. There's still questions? I'm okay, korang nanti kena halau dengan hotel, aku tak tahu.
We still have 4 minutes, so let's take 2 very concise questions.
Okay, good evening everyone. Since you're the former Minister of Economy, I thought I'd ask a question about the economy. Now, Malaysia can track billions and billions of ringgits of FDIs. We have new master plans, etc. But so long as the majority of Malaysians remain poor, Malaysia is still poor. Are Malaysians too comfortable? And how do we economically challenge the majority of Malaysians? Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, YB. My name is Wan. So you told us to reflect a lot. And I think one of the way to reflect is to think better. So at the very fundamental level of being a reformist, I think if you would help us to give a framework of thinking on how to think better, envision something that is highly audacious to create a Malaysia where change is like a norm for us. So how would you teach us to think better, to be a critical or radical change maker? Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Next question.
Kalau just one more. So basically, I've worked in three different social enterprises, and two of them I co-founded. And I know that post-minister cabinet, you've redirected Ayo Malaysia to social enterprise. So considering that you've been in the ivory towers of government, what insight do you see that has potential with social enterprise, and how can we as the youth join in as well? Thank you.
Last question. What would you do when I break that 1 minute left? Are you going to throw me out of the hall? Or?
No.
Zero? Okay.
I'll try to keep it very short.
Most probably UKC has to pay more. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it very short. My question, hi YB, thank you for your time. My question is very similar to the very first question, if you remember, and it's about what do you, we've come to a very uncertain time now in Malaysian politics. What do you foresee will happen to the current Pakatan, Harapan and PKR after Anwar Ibrahim, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim? What do you foresee will happen? Because, that's all.
Okay, I will try to answer quickly so that UKEC doesn't have to run to CIMB and get extra sponsorship to pay. First question is about the economy, Prof. Williams here. Okay, you see, when you say that all these investments, growth means nothing if the people are poor, it depends to whom you talk to. Because if you look at our national number, actually incidence of absolute poverty is about 4%. It's about 4%. Incidence of abject poverty is about 0.18%. So on paper, Malaysia is doing really well. There's not many poor people in Malaysia. Any government who comes in and out, one day Waf will become Minister of Economy, he will say exactly the same thing. So in terms of where we are as a country, in terms of our fight against poverty and so on, I think we've done really well. Unfortunately, we are stuck at the upper middle income category. So we have a society that aspires to be Koreans or Japanese or Europeans. But everything about our economy, the complexity of it, the wage level, the productivity is not there. And it's a ticking time bomb, So, and therefore, and this is the bit where, Malaysians and governments and political parties and economies have been pointing fingers at each other. Whose fault is this? I think, government has to bear a lot of responsibilities to push the complexity of the economy. Only when our economy goes into the high gear of value creation, that means that we no longer pasang lah. We actually innovate and create, and then what we sell is no longer plastic. What we sell is basically our brain. Only then can we hire engineers and then do real engineering work. How many of you actually are going back as engineers? Do you know why I decided not to become engineers after coming back from my first summer holiday? I went and see some of my seniors and asked them, what exactly do you do as an engineer in Petronas? And then I realized they are nothing more than paper pushers. They actually don't do the engineering work. They just manage contractors who do the engineering work. They manage the invitation to bid, the spec, they manage the tender, So then I realized, actually, this is not what I want. If I were to graduate as an engineer, I actually want to be doing circuits. Unfortunately, in Malaysia, when you go back to your sponsor and so on, not many of you will actually end up as an engineer. You will become an administrator with an engineering degree. And the reason for that is because there's just not enough jobs. We don't have labs. We don't create all this. When we build expensive plants, we actually use technology from the US, Japan, Korea. They come bulk and build everything with their engineers. We just manage them, you see. So whose fault is that? That's what the government actually has to push more, basically, and it comes in policies, it comes in. So I think once we are able to do that, and that's why, you know, my short time at Ministry of Economy, I really put a lot of focus on wage level. Let's move away from poverty index, incident, and so on. Because if you talk to people, they earn 4,000 to 5,000 ringgit a month, which statistically they are not poor. But if you look at their livelihood, at how they struggle, they consider they are really poor. And they may not be wrong, you know, because they aspire for something else bigger. And then, you know, economic headlines numbers are just headlines numbers. It doesn't mean anything to society. You will end up with 5-6% economic growth, but if the income disparity is very huge in society, eventually it will create chaos. So wage level becomes important. Unfortunately, you cannot force businesses to just pay when it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make business sense. They will go bankrupt doing that. And this is where I think, you know, the next 5-year plan and successive governments have to really focus in making sure that our economy's complexity increase in tandem. Because there's no point having PNB 118 when everything else most probably was built by Samsung, I think, you know, and a lot of everything that comes in it was actually built by someone else. You just go in. All this is quite, a challenge for our economy at this stage. That's why we've been stuck at the upper middle income for the last, 15, 20 years, I think. The second question was on social enterprise, is it? Okay, the second question was on social enterprise. I think you will, to those who are interested, and I think you should be interested, because if you want to do something and you want to impact change and still grow an organization, going forward, most probably, apart from startups, social enterprise is one of the better ways of doing it. But from the national perspective, we cannot afford to tax and spend for the next generation. Your generation is already inheriting a huge debt, because previous generation kicked the can down the road. It's going to be your problem. When you are at the height of your career and form the biggest part of the workforce, you will be at the right smack at the center of an aging nation. The number of workforce is going to get smaller. You have this burden of paying for yourself and paying for your parents. And as people live longer, they require more care than have ever been in our society. You know, long-term care, health care, and so on. You know, so if we are stuck with just two models of public service, either you tax and spend from, you know, publicly provided services, or everything is paid to corporations or private companies, we are going to have this recurring problem of medical inflation, of cost of living, and so on. You know, that's why it's of national importance to create the third sector, which is good, sustainable, operationally sustainable businesses that provides all these basic goods and services, but not done for profit making. Money is being circulated, public can put in, government can put in. Operationally and financially, we should focus to create this third sector, which is basically social enterprises, so that it can balance the market forces and it can balance the first sector, which is public sector, the second sector, which is the private sector. I mean, it's very nascent. In fact, we put it into RMK 13, and based on the timeline, the government only plans to come up with the first legislation in 2028. We need the legislation for that and so on. I can't remember, the third question was on PKR, is it? Or there's another question. There was 4 questions again. The third question, how to think better. Okay, now. You guys are far smarter than all of us. I don't think what you need is brain. Frankly speaking. I think you all are smart. You can figure things out yourself. What you need is heart. It's not brain. So don't ask, there's nothing we can impart to you that can make you think better and so on. But I hope you will become a better citizen, because your challenge is that on the path that you have now, you are on the route to become toxic middle class by the time you are 30. Because this is what will happen, most of you. You will go back, you have a career with your lanyard and tie and so on. You think you're on top of the world, and then you will chase your promotion and your middle class lifestyle. By 30, only a fraction of you actually achieve what you want. Majority of you are stuck in your corporate rat race with your expensive mortgage and your car and the need to go further and further, and then you don't know where to stop. And once you cross 30, you start thinking everything else is stupid and wrong in this country. Why am I not getting my opportunity? So what you need is heart. What you need to understand, that is not the be and end of everything. You will define what matters to you as a person. And you can only do that by bringing yourself down from the high pedestal. Because, I mentioned about how our society promotes comfort zone. You are in your comfort zone now. Of course, my generation created Kalsom. Every now and then, and in fact, I think I was very unpopular then, because I remember when I gave a speech in one of the Kalsom. And I was only, I think, about 20, 21, and I told the facilitators, I think, please don't treat this as your summer camp, just so that you feel good about yourself. Because this is not about you, this is about the kids, the poor kids. Unfortunately, you are on that pedestal. You will always look, above. You never look down. You never go down. So take your time, go down and understand, and from there, I think, if it makes you a better person, that you feel more comfortable outside the hall of Nico Hotel, Intercontinental Hotel, you're more comfortable with people, the so-called downtrodden, people who struggle out there, and I think you will figure out what to do. If anything, that's what's missing. It's not brain, it's heart. Yeah? Last question about what will happen to PKR and PH after Anwar Ibrahim. God knows. All I can say is this, most of the parties in the world that were elected on the basis of bringing reform find it very difficult to stay beyond 1 or 2 terms. They usually got kicked out, and then the very party that they campaigned to replace came back to power. And that's the lesson in Japan with LDP. That's also the lesson in Mexico and many other parts of the world. And that's why it's very important for PH and PKR to continue building its raison d'etre beyond Anwar Ibrahim. People don't like, in PKR or PH, people don't like when I say it. It doesn't matter who after Anwar Ibrahim. The essence of PKR and PH as a reform government that contrasts, the rest, has to be preserved. Because beyond that, then I think it's very difficult to convince the public about why they should stick to PKR and PH. And one final sentence before, Mamat ni dah bangah dah. Dia tengah WhatsApp dengan Intercontinental punya management. I don't think that PKR and PH have managed to retain at least 80 seats every election since 2008. I don't think it's because predominantly or purely because of Anwar Ibrahim. I think it's because Malaysia wants change. Malaysia wants something better. And they feel that Anwar Ibrahim is able to cobble together diverse group of people who can actually govern better and think differently and deliver better. That's my caution to the government after we take over. That if you change it so that everything revolves around Anwar Ibrahim, is actually dangerous. Because that's not what people voted for in the beginning. People voted for change. They wanted to see active and meaningful contribution of everything. And Anwar Ibrahim was a figurehead. If the public now thinks that Anwar Ibrahim is the B and N of PKR and PH, we are in trouble. And I hope, the leadership of PKR and PH will take it from here and decide how they want to strengthen and plan for the post-Anwar Ibrahim time. Thank you very much. Please send the bill to CIMB.
We will be Dato' Sri.